Hi guys, it's Jane from Megovan, and today we're gonna talk about Elrond and his brother Elros. There is a lot that we can say about the brothers, but in today's video, I'm going to do a comparison between Elros' choice of a mortal life and Elrond's choice of immortality. So, who are Elrond and Elros? Elrond and Elros are brothers in the line of the Half-Elven. The Half-Elven are a distinct group of individuals in Tolkien's lore who share the mortality of men and the immortality of elves. This is a unique situation, and we'll see in this video that the brothers are among very few individuals who are given the freedom to choose between mortality and immortality. Elrond and Elros are arguably Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth royalty by any standards because they are related to to everyone who was ever a somebody. For instance, their parents are Eärendil and Elwyn. They are the power couple who play a prominent role in saving Middle-earth from destruction at the end of the First Age. If you go further up the family tree, which by the way is loaded with royalty, you see that they are related to even Beren and Luthien. Beren and Luthien are star-crossed lovers, and they appear in Tolkien's most famous First Age epic fantasy novel called Beren and Luthien. Now, Elrond is thousands of years old, and he appears in The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, and in Unfinished Tales. So that means that Elrond is one of the most prominent, significant, and recognizable characters in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Meanwhile, his brother Elros was the first king of Númenor. The men of Númenor are the men who eventually found Gondor. After ruling Gondor for a little over 400 years, Elros died in the year 442 of the Second Age, which is about 600 years before Frodo and the events of Jackson's trilogy. So by the time we meet Elrond in Rivendell in the context of the War of the Ring, it's important to understand that he's been around for years. He and his brother were born in the year 532 of the First Age of Middle-earth. And when we first meet Elrond in the film, in the Third Age of Middle-earth, Elrond is just over 6,500 years old at that point because he's immortal. This is why in the movie, when he has a multi-millennia flashback all the way back to the War of the Last Alliance that took place at the very end of the Second Age of Middle-earth, Elrond looks exactly the same as he did 3,000 years ago. We find a lot of information on Elrond's immortality in the Silmarillion. To make a very, very long story short, in the First Age of Middle-earth, this very bad guy called Morgoth ran a terrible campaign against the people of Middle-earth. Elrond's mom and dad, Elwyn and Eärendil, were alive and well at that time, and they took it upon themselves to enter Valinor and plead with the Valar to intervene on behalf of the people of Middle-earth. This was a big deal. The Valar are angelic beings or gods who are subordinate to Eru Ilúvatar. Eru Ilúvatar is the supreme being of the universe and creator of all existence, including elves and men. The Valar lived in Valinor at that time. Valinor is the nation located across the sea in a continent west of Middle-earth called Aman. Aman is where elves go to dwell in eternal bliss, and Aman is also where Gandalf, Elrond, Celeborn, Galadriel, Bilbo, and Frodo head off to from the elvish port of Grey Heaven at the end of the Return of the King. So back to the First Age. When Elrond and Elros' parents were up and about, it was strictly prohibited for anyone of human blood to enter Valinor, which included Eärendil and his wife because they were both half human. The penalty that was to be bestowed on anyone with human blood who stepped foot on the shores of Valinor was death. But the Valar were moved by Elwyn and Eärendil's efforts, and instead of killing them, they decided to help them. The Valar then, they rounded up a large army, and that army was able to overthrow Morgoth. And as a reward for their bravery, the Valar gave Elwyn and Eärendil what is called a choice of kindred, meaning they could choose to be immortal or be mortal. Elwyn chose to be an elf. Eärendil, on the other hand, wanted to be a mortal man, but for the sake of his wife, he chose to be an elf. So both ended up being immortal. This is not something that the Valar normally do, and from all the Tolkien I've read so far, they are the only ones who are given the choice to choose a side. And the choice was also extended to their direct descendants, including their twin sons, Elrond and Elros. So let's first unpack Elros' decision to opt for immortality. In a way, it seems like an odd choice, right? Like, why on earth would somebody willingly choose mortality when mortality is on the table? Well, it sounds like a tad nuts, but it was a pretty wise choice. So first of all, it's not as if Elros was destined to be like your average Joe on the street. I'm not sure if he was briefed on all the benefits of opting for mortality before he had to decide, but when Elros chose to be of mankind, he was granted a great lifespan, and along with another group of faithful humans, he was given wisdom and power. Essentially, Elros' decision gave rise to the Númenóreans, and he became the first king of Númenor, from which Aragorn's family line and the people of Gondor descend. This is why Aragorn looks so fucking hot for an 87-year-old man. Under the rule of Elros and those of his descendants, the Númenóreans rose to become very powerful. Another element that possibly sweetened the deal for Elros is the gift of the island of Númenor itself. Númenor was quite beautiful. We get a very detailed description of Númenor in part 2 of Unfinished Tales, in a chapter entitled A Description of the Island of Númenor. In that chapter, Tolkien tells us about a picturesque, beautiful, and altogether idyllic and peaceful society that's adorned with beautiful trees, that has nice flowers, and those flowers exude sweet scents. It's a place with many birds and home to horses that were trained to hear and answer calls from great distances. Tolkien also describes Númenor as the land of gifts, where the star of Eärendil shone brightly in the west. Tolkien also offers a few lines about how much the inhabitants took delight in swimming and diving into the sea and participating in competitions like rowing and sailing contests. I can't say for sure if the island of Númenor helped to tip the scale for Elros in favor of mortality, but it's certainly within the realms of possibility. Another area in the death versus immortality debate worth exploring is how the journey towards death differs from elves to men. Tolkien tells us in the Silmarillion that when elves die, their soul gets separated from their bodies and their spirits travel to the halls of Mandos. The halls of Mandos it's a system of great caverns and underground halls where spirits rest for a time as disembodied shades. After a period of cleansing and self-reflection, and based on their actions that they did when they were in life, Tolkien suggests that in the vast majority of cases, elves are reborn into new bodies. So at the end of the process, they are in a way reincarnated into bodies of bodies that are identical to their original bodies in the prior life, and they get to rejoin all the other lives living in Valinor. Most of the dead elves do return to corporal life and rejoin all of the other elves living in Valinor, but Mandos has the power to deny an elf corporal form if they were like a bad person in life. Also, if an elf lacks the will to live again, they remain like as sad, disembodied shades in the halls of Mandos until the end of time or until they feel better. So on a whole, immortality is not all cupcakes and rosebuds for elves. Human spirits, on the other hand, may or may not travel to the hall of Mandos upon death. I'm not 100% sure, but what I do know is that they don't stay there, and instead they pass beyond Valinor to a secret place, and nobody knows what this secret place is except maybe Mandos himself or Eru Ilúvatar. So when you compare men's death journey to that of elves, men might have a better deal, or perhaps a quicker deal. So with that death journey in mind, it's possible to see how death in and of itself might not have scared Elros, and he could have viewed a mortal life as a more attractive option, especially if, as a mortal man, he would still get to benefit from an extremely long life of over 400 years old. And let's remember that throughout Tolkien's Legendarium, as well as in The Lord of the Rings, we see time and time again that although men are, in fact, they are lesser beings when compared to elves, men can certainly rise to amazing heights. And we have great examples of this. A first super good example is Elros' great-grandfather Beren. Beren was the son of a chief and the tribe that he was in was destroyed by Sauron's forces. This was in the first age of Middle Earth. After waging a one-man guerrilla war against superior forces, Beren escaped and went through a lot of hardship in escaping, and he ended up in an elvish kingdom, and there he fell in love with the king's daughter Luthien, and in order to obtain her father's permission to wed her, he did what was deemed impossible. He successfully brought back a Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth. Another Middle-earth rock star is King Theoden, right? When Gondor called for aid, Rohan responded despite many years of bad blood between the two kingdoms. And Theoden himself led the armies against Sauron's force in the War of the Ring, and he died a very honorable death at the Battle of Pelennor Field. We also have Eowyn. Eowyn was an accomplished fighter in Rohan who almost single-handedly killed the Witch King of Angmar. Another great man for the books is Isildur. Say what you will about Isildur, but Isildur was one of the greatest kings of Gondor. During the War of the Last Alliance, Sauron was in possession of the ring, which gave him nearly unlimited power over his enemies, but Isildur was able to cut the ring from Sauron's hand, so clearly Isildur is super strong and a brilliant warrior. Also, we have Isildur to thank for the conservation of the White Tree of Gondor. Just before the fall of Númenor, Isildur risked his life and snuck into the royal palace and stole like a bit of the White Tree of Gondor, which helped to preserve the tree for many years down the line. And of course, we have Aragorn. Aragorn spent much of his time avoiding his royal responsibilities and wandering in the woods of Middle-earth. But once he took his fate into his own hand, he blew us all away. Not only is he a brave warrior with a heart of gold, Aragorn fought to protect the Fellowship, saw that the One Ring was safely destroyed in Mordor, and led the forces of men against the Dark Lord. The last and probably the most important point I want to make for mortality is that Tolkien actually presents death as a gift. In his Legendarium, death is in fact presented as the gift of men. And while the details of what on earth this really means are a little vague, the gift of men refers to a gift from Eru Ilúvatar to men, and men in Tolkien's Legendarium are Eru's children, the younger children, and they come after the elves. So the point I'm trying to make here is that while there are certainly some perks associated with immortality, opting for mortal life spared Elros from quite a bit of hardship. Unlike Elrond, he does get to escape the whole War of the Ring business, and he also doesn't have to see his twin brother die. As far as I know, Tolkien doesn't give a reason why Elros made the choice that he did, so it's open to speculation. Maybe the two brothers flipped a coin. Maybe he just accepted the role that Eru intended for him and trusted that his true purpose lies between the boundaries of the world. Or maybe he found the idea of living forever dreadful. Take his father, for example. His dad would have preferred to be a man, and he only chose to be accepted to be immortal for the sake of his wife. Whatever Elros' reasoning was, I think we can definitely say, well, confidently say that it's not all bad being a man. And while Elros did not live as long as his brother, he had a good and fulfilled life, and he left a legacy of men who became instrumental in the War of the Ring against the Dark Lord. Now, let's switch our focus to a life of immortality and give poor Elrond some love. Contrary to his brother, Elrond chose to be of elven kind, and during his 6,000 plus years alive, he did some extraordinary things. When we meet him in the Fellowship of the Ring, he immediately commands respect. He's well dressed, and it's super clear that this guy is way up there in the social ladder of everything. He's one of the few characters to show up in all three books. He shows up in The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and even The Silmarillion. When we meet him in the Fellowship of the Ring, Elrond is a healer and Lord of Rivendell. Beyond his responsibilities though, Elrond developed an incredible depth of wisdom that can only be amassed through thousands of years of experience. And throughout his life, he developed an intimate connection to mortal man, which is fantastic because strategic unions between elves and men was instrumental in their fight against Sauron. Maybe his deep connection with mortal man has to do with the fact that his own twin brother was immortal, who knows? Well, Tolkien knows. And perhaps he wrote somewhere that I'm dead wrong on this, but I didn't come across it yet, so for the moment I'll just leave it at that and say it's a possibility. Beyond his famous great-grandparents and brother, Elrond's immediate family is also super impressive. Elrond married a life named Celebrian. Celebrian is the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. Celeborn is said to be one of the wisest elves in Middle-earth at the end of the Third Age, and Galadriel is a resident badass who surpasses all other elves in beauty and knowledge and power. So yes, Galadriel is Elrond's mother-in-law, which obviously explains why they're so tight in the films. Elrond and Celebrian, his wife, had 3 children, including twin sons and Arwen, who all play a part in the fight against Sauron. Elrond's sons don't make a direct appearance in Jackson's trilogy, but they do show up in the books. The 2 of them, they accompany Aragorn to the Path of the Death, and they also fight at the Battle of Pelennor Field. As for his daughter Arwen, Arwen is the one who helped Aragorn assume his responsibilities to Gondor, and eventually Arwen becomes the Queen of Gondor and Arnor, which of course adds that much more power and prestige to an already dominant family. Elrond's life is also very stuffed because he took part in a lot of important events in Middle-earth history. He fought in the War of the Elves and Sauron in the Second Age. His involvement in those battles leads him to becoming vice-regent of the newly erected fortress of Rivendell, and also second in command to a High King called Gil-galad. Gil-galad is the holy grail of elves, and he had like a million titles. I don't even know how to properly explain how much authority Gil-galad had. Imagine a dude who's essentially a combination of Cristiano Ronaldo, Achilles, Odysseus, Barack Obama, and Dwight Eisenhower. Fuck. Like, that's Gil-galad for you, and Elrond was his right-hand man. On top of this prestigious military honor, Gil-galad gave Elrond Vilya, which is the mightiest of the 3 elven rings. By the way, all of this takes place way before the War of the Last Alliance that we see in the prologue of Jackson's trilogy. So I'm going way back in Middle-earth history. Now, the War of the Last Alliance from the prologue, that war takes place over 1500 years later at the end of the Second Age. So at that point, the end of the Second Age, during the War of the Last Alliance, Elrond was in the center of the action of all the battles during the battles of the Last Alliance. And he witnessed all the drama. Like, he was there when Gil-galad and the Númenorian king Elendil are killed in battle. He's there when Elendil's son Isildur cuts the One Ring from Sauron's finger. He's also there to see Isildur keep the ring and fuck everybody over. After the War of the Last Alliance, things in Middle-earth kind of chilled down for some time, so Elrond returned to Rivendell and took it easy for a few hundred years. During that time, Elrond ruled as Lord of Rivendell, and he kept an eye on the shards of Narsil, and he began fostering the various heirs of Isildur, which eventually leads to Aragorn growing up in Rivendell and falling in love with his daughter Arwen. It's also during this period of relative calm that Elrond, he builds a reputation as a lore master and as a healer. And while he continued doing very important work for the good people of Middle-earth, like joining an attack against the Witch King of Angmar on Weathertop, he joined the White Council along with a lot of the big shots like Gandalf, Saruman, his mother-in-law Galadriel, and that council was to strategize a game plan against Sauron. He also healed Frodo from the deadly wound that he got from the knife. And of course, he hosted an impromptu council where it's decided that the One Ring should be destroyed. He hand-selected and framed the Fellowship of the Ring. He sent his sons to join Aragorn at the Battle of the Dead. And he also, at that time, he advised Aragorn and company to attack the Black Gates in order to distract Sauron from Frodo's quest. And he also took the time and he personally delivered the sword Andúril to Aragorn, his future son-in-law. So apart from all of that, Elrond became more of a source of wisdom and support rather than a leader and a warrior on the front lines. Well, in Middle-earth standards anyways. Now, with all of that being said, let's go back to talking about mortality and immortality, because this is obviously a notorious theme with this family. I mean, his great-grandmother, Luthien, was an elf who chose immortality in order to wed his great-grandfather, Baron. His father chose immortality for the sake of his wife, and of course his brother also chose mortality. And while Elrond had a long and impressive life on Middle-earth, his daughter's decision to live a mortal life was kind of a last straw for him. I think no matter how strong a person is, one can only put up with a certain amount of death. And even though Elrond was eventually super cool with the union of his daughter and Aragorn, the loss of his daughter was super, like, it cost him a lot of grief, and it was a bit of a blow to his spirits, because that means that he will never see her again, which was a big deal. So when the Third Age officially wrapped up in victory against Sauron and Saruman, I guess, but against Sauron was achieved, and his daughter was married to a mortal, Elrond finally grew weary of Middle-earth, and he was due for some serious R&R, because at this point, he's been involved in the events of the continent for over 6,000 years, and I support his decision to up and leave to join all the other elves in Valinor for a well-deserved retirement. And up in Valinor, there was his own wife who had been there for a number of years at that point. His wife actually went through quite an ordeal and suffered from psychological shock and trauma, so we'll talk about her on a different day. Now, I'm not one to say which brother made the best decision, because as we saw in this video, each brother played a different role in the grand scheme of things. They both gradually contributed to the successful victory against Sauron. Elros gave rise to Gondor and Númenor, which is huge, and Elrond did everything else. I did a lot of digging around in the books in preparation for this video, and I know that there is still a lot that can be said and a lot that we can explore about the duo, but let's leave it for another video. So until then, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you wish, like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really does help. Farewell.